It began as a series of faint sonar echoes beneath the still waters of Lake Vättern, Sweden's second largest lake. What the research vessel Sjöfn registered that morning in October 2023 was not rock or sediment, but a geometric void, an artificial chamber sealed in silence since the last days of World War II. The divers who first descended described the cold as unnatural, the pressure heavier than it should have been. They found a concrete hatch, embossed with Luftwaffe insignia beside faded US Air Force markings. Within days, Swedish intelligence agents arrived, cordoning off the site under the pretext of environmental hazard assessment. Locals spoke of unmarked vehicles on forest roads and government officials who refused to speak on record. The classified operation that followed would unearth not only a bunker, but the shadow of a collaboration buried by two nations desperate to erase their shared secret: the existence of Operation Svalin. Chapter 1. The bunker beneath Lake Vättern. At 0742 on October 18, 2023, the Swedish Maritime Research Authority registered a cluster of sonar anomalies during a civilian mapping survey commissioned by the University of Gothenburg. Coordinates 58°98'43 N, 14°38'12. He placed the reading near the lake's southern basin, an area long restricted for military use during the Cold War. The lead researcher, Dr. Henrik Ahlström, initially assumed the reflection was the result of glacial moraine. It was only after the third pass of the sonar array that the geometric symmetry appeared. A rectangular void, 40 meters long, reinforced with concrete, and buried under nearly 70 meters of silt and freshwater pressure. Ahlström's report, filed as document SMRA 2023-105, included the notation, unnaturally uniform substructure, probable post-war installation. 2 days later, the file was quietly reclassified by Försvarsmakten, Sweden's armed forces. The first diver to make contact with the structure was naval contractor Ingrid Falk. Her body camera footage, timestamped 0926, recorded the descent into darkness, beams of light scattering through suspended particles until the bunker's wall materialized from the black. The concrete was smooth, overlaid with decades of mineral buildup. When Falk brushed away the sediment near the base, the camera caught a faint insignia, an eagle clutching a swastika. She later described a metallic vibration beneath her gloves, a low-frequency hum, as if something deep within the structure resonated with her movement. The footage cut abruptly at 0931 when communications failed. She resurfaced shaken but alive. The hatch had been real, she said, and it wasn't German alone. There were English words welded beneath the paint. On October 22nd, the Swedish Ministry of Defence took operational control of the site under Directive L4523, invoking post-war neutrality statutes. A floating perimeter was installed, monitored by unmarked patrol boats. Publicly, the area was declared an ecological preservation zone due to subsurface chemical instability. Privately, a joint task force was formed under the codename Project Glasvingen, Glasswing. Internal memoranda later obtained by journalists referenced cooperation with a foreign defense liaison, though no official partner nation was named. Within 48 hours of activation, a temporary decompression platform was constructed above the coordinates, and a crew of 12 divers was sworn to silence under national security oaths. Declassified fragments from 2024 reveal that entry was achieved on the third attempt. Divers used plasma torches to breach the corroded locking mechanism. At a depth of 73 meters, they entered a reinforced airlock chamber filled with stagnant water and silt. The inner door bore markings in English: U.S. Army property, do not enter, 1946. The conflicting insignia raised immediate alarm. Sweden had never officially hosted US military installations during or after the war. A joint communication from Försvarsmakten to the Swedish Security Service, SEPO, archived as Memo 23452A, noted presence of dual national military markings inconsistent with known wartime operations, possible site of post-war intelligence exchange. What the report did not state was that the inner chamber contained 32 sealed crates. By the time, the crates were extracted and transferred to the secure facility at Karlsborg Fortress, the operation had drawn attention from NATO's Historical Analysis Division. An encrypted message dated November 3, 2023, between Colonel A. Leclerc, SHAPE, and Brigadier General R. Wilson, USAFR, reads, Vetten's site likely corresponds to classified element of Svalin project, archived under Echelon Red 113. Recommend containment until diplomatic strategy established. The term Svalin had not appeared in any accessible NATO documentation. It would take another 6 months before an investigative journalist, Lena Eklöf, uncovered its significance through a leaked 1951 OSS memorandum. Operation Svalin, continuation of atmospheric dispersion tests utilizing German prototype apparatus, joint Anglo-American oversight with Swedish logistical support. The 1951 memo connected the dots between the insignia found on the hatch and post-war scientific migration. During the late 1940s, both the United States and the United Kingdom covertly relocated dozens of German scientists under Operation Paperclip and its lesser-known European counterpart, Operation Surgeon. Sweden, officially neutral but economically dependent on both blocs, had served as a discreet testing ground. Declassified trade records show anomalous imports of aviation chemicals and meteorological equipment into Stockholm between 1947 and 1949 under civilian research invoices linked to the Nordic Atmospheric Research Council. The council dissolved abruptly in 1950, leaving no public archives. Inside the Vetten bunker, analysts documented a chilling inventory: glass vials containing unknown precipitate, rusted apparatus with pressure gauges labeled in both German and English, and rolls of 16mm film marked Luftwaffe 1944, Versuchsreihe 5B. The film reels were sent to the National Archives in Stockholm for restoration. What they revealed changed the investigation entirely. The footage, partially degraded, depicted a series of high-altitude tests conducted somewhere over northern Europe. The narration, in clipped German, referred to the Svalin Dispersal Unit, a wing-mounted device emitting vapor trails designed to manipulate atmospheric pressure gradients. Analysts concluded that the experiments aimed to alter weather patterns for tactical advantage, years before modern cloud seeding was publicly developed. But a fragment of footage at the reel's end showed a flag not of Nazi Germany, but the United States, fluttering beside a runway identified as belonging to the Uppsala airfield, 1946. When questioned about post-war collaboration, the Swedish Ministry of Defense denied all involvement. Yet a letter surfaced from 1946, signed by Colonel Eric Lundström of the Swedish Air Force, addressed to the US Army Air Technical Service Command. As per your directive, our technicians will oversee the decommissioning of experimental Site Vetten and ensure all records remain under dual custody. The letter was stored in the ministry's closed archive and only revealed through a Freedom of Information request in early 2024. Historians later confirmed that Lundström had disappeared in 1952, while en route to Copenhagen, his aircraft vanishing without trace. As journalists began to probe, witnesses from the surrounding communities recalled local rumors dating back decades. Fishermen reporting unnatural fogs forming over the lake in the 1950s, and former defense contractors who claimed to have heard engines underwater. One elderly resident, 92-year-old Gunnar Berg, recounted how his father, an engineer during the early Cold War, was tasked with reinforcing a sealed German chamber at the bottom of the lake. Berg's father never spoke of it again and destroyed his journals before his death in 1974. By late 2024, Project Glasvingen was formally suspended, the bunker was resealed, and a classified statement was issued under the authority of the Swedish Prime Minister's office, citing national safety and international stability. However, internal leaks indicated that not all crates had been recovered. 3 containers, each marked with the word stratum, remained unaccounted for. Their contents are believed to have been removed prior to official recovery efforts, possibly by foreign agents embedded in the task force. Satellite imagery from November 2023 later revealed the presence of an unregistered aircraft departing from Karlsborg airfield, heading south toward the Baltic. In February 2025, a whistleblower within the European Defence Agency released a cache of documents labelled Echo Svalin 47. Among them was an aerial reconnaissance photo dated 1949 showing a convoy of US military trucks transporting sealed containers across the Swedish countryside. The accompanying report, signed by OSS analyst Harold Baines, described the cargo as Phase 3 Atmospheric Instrumentation for Transatlantic Projection. Baines's notes included a final cryptic line: The swallow must never fly again. Svalin, Swedish for swallow, had been the codename all along, the name of an operation that sought to weaponize the weather, later concealed under Cold War diplomatic shadows. Today, the Vättern site remains under restricted classification. Divers are forbidden entry within a 10-kilometer radius. The official record refers to the structure as a hydrological monitoring station constructed during the 1950s. Yet the surviving footage from Falk's dive tells a different story. The hatch bearing dual insignia, the hum beneath the concrete, and a shadowed corridor disappearing into the depths. The recovered films, now held under NATO archival code RED 113B, are stored in a secure vault in Brussels. Their audio remains partially untranslated due to corrosion, but one phrase has been isolated and verified by multiple linguists. Spoken in German, faintly beneath the static, it says, "Der Himmel ist nicht mehr frei." The sky is no longer free. Chapter 2. Operation Svalin. The first public mention of Operation Svalin appeared in a leaked intelligence memorandum from the Swedish Defense Archives in March 2024. The memo, dated July 12, 1951, and signed by Lieutenant Colonel Arvid Ekström, referenced the continuation of classified research under the authority of Anglo-American partners regarding meteorological manipulation protocols. At first, historians dismissed it as a mistranslation, a relic of the post-war scramble for scientific legitimacy. But further examination of the archive revealed a pattern of falsified storage manifests and redirected shipments tied to fictitious research institutes. Each bore the same notation: Svalin, Phase 2, restricted. When cross-referenced against declassified US documents, the name appeared again, this time in a 1948 Air Technical Intelligence Command ATIC report from Wright Field, Ohio. In bold, across the header, was stamped Svalin, Atmospheric Dispersal Systems, Joint European Prototype. Beneath that, a chilling subnote: Origin, Swedish Lake Facility, 58° N. The Cold War was still crystallizing when these files were drafted. Europe was rebuilding from ruin, and science, especially atmospheric and atomic, had become the new frontier of power. Behind the rhetoric of progress lay desperation. The Allied powers had inherited German archives far beyond the moral threshold of science. Human experimentation, climate-based warfare concepts, and theoretical models for global disruption. Most were deemed too dangerous or speculative to pursue, yet Operation Svalin was quietly exempted. Unlike the atomic projects, which demanded massive infrastructure, Svalin required only weather, chemistry, and secrecy. According to the 1951 ATIC Annex, its stated objective was development of high-altitude aerosol systems for rapid localized cloud induction and kinetic disruption. In practice, it aimed to change the battlefield itself. In early 2025, investigative journalist Lena Eklöf interviewed Dr. Johan Norby, a retired meteorologist who had once worked under the Swedish Defense Research Establishment, FOA. Though frail and hesitant, Norby confirmed that he had seen the Svalin documents in 1979 while cataloguing Cold War research materials. It wasn't about weather control for agriculture, he said. They were testing aerosolized metallic compounds for atmospheric resonance. They called it resonant interference, a way to reflect radar through manipulated air density. The Americans called it cloud camouflage. When asked how long the experiments continued, Norby fell silent. His final words before ending the interview were, "The lake is still active." The American connection deepened with the discovery of an unindexed microfilm roll inside the US National Archives, Box 1045, file series Operation Pelican. The film contained correspondences between ATIC officers and Swedish Air Force liaisons. A letter dated August 3, 1947, from Colonel Daniel H. Brooks to the US Embassy in Stockholm, stated, "Test installation Svalin proceeding with acceptable atmospheric yields. Recommend logistical expansion under Nordic jurisdiction for deniability." The acceptable yields were quantified in the margin. Pressure deviation 0.8 kPa within 12-kilometer radius. In layman's terms, that was enough to alter wind direction and barometric readings across an entire military operation zone. The tests appeared to have occurred over Lake Vättern and possibly extended to northern Norway. The presence of US personnel in neutral Swedish territory during this period remains officially denied. Archival photographs obtained from the Royal Library of Stockholm, catalogue number RB 7312-1948, show aerial views of the southern basin of Lake Fetton during winter 1948. What seems like fog rolling over the water forms distinct concentric rings, expanding from a central point near where the modern sonar readings later found the bunker. Annotations in the corner, written in blue ink, read, Series 4, Svalin dispersion successful. Visibility reduced 92%. Wind reversal confirmed. Below, in faint pencil, someone had written, Witnesses silenced. The handwriting was later matched to that of Lieutenant Colonel Ekstrom. For decades, the name Svalin vanished from public record, but it re-emerged in 1962 during NATO's internal review of meteorological warfare ethics, known as the Oslo Conference. A section of the minutes, later declassified, referred obliquely to the Swedish model as an example of dual-use atmospheric research with potential tactical applications. When pressed, the Swedish delegation insisted they had no knowledge of such a program. Yet one page of the American report, labeled Annex C, Observations, included a redacted note attributed to a US Air Weather Service officer. Svalin array active until 1953, terminated after structural breach and containment loss. Civilian casualties unconfirmed. The word containment was never defined. In 2024, data recovered from a damaged Swedish Defense Ministry hard drive shed light on what that breach may have been. Among the deleted files was an internal FOA report dated June 4, 1953, titled Anomalous Weather Event, Veton Sector. The report described a sudden formation of a hyperdense fog bank lasting 9 hours, accompanied by static discharge across the shoreline. Electrical systems in nearby Karlsborg reportedly failed, and the incident caused the cancellation of multiple civilian flights. No fatalities were officially recorded, but meteorological readings showed radiation levels exceeding standard background limits by 40%. Subsequent studies claimed the readings were instrumental errors, though the pattern matched data later observed near nuclear test zones. The report concluded with a cryptic line: recommend permanent submersion of Site V1 to prevent recurrence. That line corresponds directly to the buried structure divers discovered 70 years later. Permanent submersion was not metaphorical, the facility had been intentionally flooded. A classified budget ledger from 1954 lists hydrological modification equipment purchased under the Nordic Defence Cooperation. Engineers familiar with Cold War infrastructure confirmed that such terminology typically referred to controlled demolition through underwater detonation. By flooding the bunker, Swedish and American authorities had effectively sealed away the experiment and erased its existence from operational history. Yet the materials, particularly the metallic aerosols, may have persisted in the sediment, binding to the lake's microclimate for decades. Modern environmental surveys of Veton have shown unexplained concentrations of strontium and nickel isotopes in water samples, consistent with the compounds described in Svalin documentation. The true purpose of the project remained elusive until the discovery of File 17-5B, Tactical Weather Integration Research, NATO restricted. The document, recovered from the Bundesarchiv in Koblenz, detailed a meeting held in Brussels on November 18, 1952, between NATO scientific advisors. One section described a proposal to incorporate atmospheric resonance technology to enhance radar, deception and troop concealment during low visibility operations. The credited source of the data was Nordic partner, Research Initiative Svalin. In effect, the Allies had adapted remnants of a Nazi program to create a new kind of battlefield, one where weather could obscure movement and distort enemy instruments. The ethical implications were severe, but no one wanted to relinquish the advantage. What began as a wartime German prototype had become a multinational secret. The original scientists behind it, several from Peenemünde and the Luftwaffe Meteorological Service, were quietly relocated to the United States and Britain under classified immigration programs. Their Swedish counterparts, engineers and physicists at Lund University and FOA, were granted immunity from prosecution for cooperation of scientific importance. Among the surviving correspondences, one note stands out, written by Dr. Friedrich Engel, a German physicist absorbed into US research after 1945. Dated February 1949, it reads, "The swallow has flown. The apparatus rests under glass, but remember this, the wind obeys no flag." In present day, Operation Svalin has become a subject of restricted inquiry within European academic circles. Swedish officials continue to deny its military origins, though internal FOA communiques acknowledge the lingering legacy of Vättern. Environmental researchers have noted that the lake's microclimate remains one of the most anomalous in Scandinavia, with frequent unexplained fog formations and thermal inversions inconsistent with regional weather models. In 2024, satellite imaging by the European Space Agency recorded an electromagnetic anomaly over the southern basin, a transient reflection pattern not attributed to natural causes. The data, when overlaid with historical flight paths from 1948 test operations, matched with alarming precision. The silence surrounding Operation Svalin has outlasted the governments that created it. Each document, each redacted line, points toward a larger coordination, a Cold War experiment erased through diplomatic convenience. In the classified lexicon of intelligence agencies, Svalin was both a project and a warning. The bunker beneath Lake Vättern, its dual insignia and sealed chambers, stands as the last monument to an era when humanity sought to master the sky itself. Whatever still sleeps beneath that lake, its hum still registers faintly on modern instruments, repeating through sonar returns like a mechanical heartbeat. Steady, deliberate, and unacknowledged. Chapter 3. The Atmospheric Experiments. When the recovered Svalin film reels were digitized in late 2024, analysts at the Swedish National Archives noted that the footage bore unusual degradation patterns, microscopic pitting along the celluloid edges, as though the film had been exposed to high levels of ozone. Frame by frame, the restoration team pieced together the lost imagery. What emerged was neither a standard scientific trial nor a battlefield test. The film, labeled WWII 5B Svalan, showed aircraft fitted with unfamiliar underwing pods, releasing a silvery particulate into dense cloud formations. The accompanying voiceover in German used technical terms for barometric manipulation and ionic suspension. Each sequence was methodical, clinical, and hauntingly beautiful. But toward the end of Reel 3, a cutaway title appeared in English: Joint Anglo-American Observation Flight, Uppsala Sector, April 1946. That single caption collapsed the firewall of deniability surrounding decades of Swedish neutrality. The experiment itself, reconstructed from flight logs and FOA records, took place on April 18, 1946 at 14:10 local time. 2 Swedish J-21 aircraft, accompanied by 1 American P-51, modified for atmospheric sampling, ascended from a remote airfield south of Uppsala. At an altitude of 8,000 meters, they deployed a payload described as aerosolized aluminum-silver compound, particle size 20 microns. Barometric data recovered from the same log show an abrupt inversion of air pressure within a 12-kilometer radius, a phenomenon that persisted for 3 hours. The Uppsala Meteorological Station recorded a sudden temperature increase at ground level, followed by rainfall containing trace metallic residue. Within weeks, reports of livestock sickness appeared in nearby rural districts. These were dismissed as unrelated, but internal FOA correspondents labeled them collateral biological response, unverified. The archival footage continued beyond the test flights. Reel 4 displayed a ground-based apparatus resembling a radar array positioned on the shore of Lake Vättern. A handwritten tag on the film case read Rückkopplungseinheit, feedback unit. The purpose of this structure became clearer when analysts found schematics in the Vättern bunker months later. Concentric ring emitters calibrated for low-frequency resonance. The notes, partly in German and partly in English, referenced synchronized atmospheric oscillation. Translated, it meant the array could send pulses through the air to induce micro-pressure shifts. This was not simply about weather modification, it was about communication, or possibly interference. A surviving entry from a 1947 US Air Technical Intelligence report described transmission anomalies during Svalin trials, possibly harmonic interaction between radar emissions and upper atmospheric particulate. The last line read, resultant distortion produces false radar echoes. Potential for tactical deception immense. By 1948, Svalin had evolved from a scientific curiosity into a classified military endeavor. Swedish Air Force memos referenced the installation of additional sensor arrays along the eastern shore of Vättern, while American technicians installed recording instruments under the pretext of meteorological calibration. The project was reorganized under dual leadership, officially Swedish, covertly American. The collaboration existed in plain sight, yet remained invisible through bureaucratic language. Budget entries referred only to hydroclimate stabilization, and procurement orders used civilian suppliers. Yet invoices recovered from Försvarsmakten archives show payment transfers routed through the US Embassy in Stockholm, specifically to front companies later tied to CIA logistical networks. Technical documentation from this period reveals increasingly ambitious objectives. File Svalin X49-4 describes trials involving chemical compounds designated A7 and F9, believed to be metallic oxides capable of reflecting radio waves. A laboratory log dated February 9, 1949, recorded that compound A7 demonstrated refractive potential sufficient to bend radar emissions 12 degrees off course. The implication was staggering. If successfully weaponized, an opposing force could be blinded by false atmospheric signals. In the tense geopolitical landscape of the early Cold War, control over the sky meant control over perception. Operation Svalin's focus shifted from atmospheric science to psychological dominance, a silent, invisible weapon. Not everyone involved shared enthusiasm for the project's trajectory. Declassified interrogation transcripts from the 1950s reveal the testimony of Dr. Friedrich Engel, one of the German scientists transferred under paperclip. His remarks, translated from the original German, read, "They wanted to make the air itself a weapon. It was no longer about rain or fog. It was about deception, confusion, making the enemy doubt their instruments, their own eyes. We built ghosts in the sky." Engel's later disappearance from US records suggests he was either reassigned or silenced. No further documentation of his work appears after 1951. Environmental readings from the post-war period reveal further anomalies. Meteorological data collected by the Swedish Weather Service in late 1949 show recurrent fog formation across the lake basin following aerosol dispersion trials. The fog exhibited unusual electromagnetic properties, disrupting early radar installations in southern Sweden. FOA's internal memo 49D12 labeled the phenomenon artificial inversion layer. Curiously, identical readings appeared in NATO weather data from 1951, centered over the North Sea during a joint exercise. A marginal note in the report read simply, "Transfer of technique confirmed." The technology had spread. When the Fetton bunker was flooded in 1953, records suggest that not all material was destroyed. According to a 1955 memorandum from the Swedish Defence Research Council, certain apparatus relocated to safe northern sector for continued theoretical study. The northern sector referred to Kiruna, a remote mining region in Lapland, home to Sweden's nascent rocket research range. Satellite imagery and oral testimony from retired personnel later confirmed that an underground storage complex existed beneath the facility, referred to in declassified NATO documents as Archive Beta. There, the remnants of Svalin's resonance equipment were believed to have been studied. Through the 1960s, the ethical dimensions of these experiments began surfacing only after the end of the Cold War. In 1996, environmental researcher Helena Widmark filed a Freedom of Information request seeking documentation on historical weather modification programs. Her request was denied on grounds of national defense exemption. 2 years later, she vanished during a solo field expedition near Lake Fetton. Her last recorded message to a colleague stated, "The readings are repeating, same frequencies as the 1940s tests." The following week, her research notebook was found floating near the southern shore, pages warped by water, covered in notations referencing harmonic signal return. No official investigation was launched. Modern data corroborate many of Widmark's suspicions. In 2023, acoustic mapping of Lake Fetton detected low-frequency oscillations between 14 and 17 Hz, emanating from beneath the sediment layer near the original coordinates. These signals mirrored the resonant interference frequencies described in the 1947 reports. The source remains unknown, but researchers noted that the vibrations intensified during periods of geomagnetic activity, as if the buried structure was still responding to atmospheric conditions. When the Swedish Navy attempted to suppress public speculation, citing sonar misreadings, independent experts released unfiltered datasets proving the signals were real. Whatever mechanism was installed beneath the lake continues to function in some form. eyewitness testimonies from local residents add an eerie human dimension. Several fishermen reported hearing faint mechanical hums beneath the water during still nights. Others described sudden fog formations appearing without wind, spreading evenly across the lake's surface. Environmental agencies attributed the phenomena to natural microclimates, but internal meteorological correspondence referenced anomalous barometric disturbance, consistent with artificial induction. The phrase echoes word-for-word language used in the 1946 Svalin flight reports. As historians and journalists began piecing together the fragments, a chilling pattern emerged. The experiments had transcended science decades ago. Svalin was less an operation than an inheritance. Technology passed quietly from regime to regime, refined under new names. Each discovery of its remains, from the flooded bunker to the surviving schematics, reactivated interest within defense circles. In 2024, a NATO research request sought access to the Vättern materials under the pretense of climate resilience modeling. Sweden refused. Weeks later, unauthorized drone footage surfaced online showing temporary structures erected along the lake's southern perimeter. The footage vanished within 24 hours. The atmospheric experiments of Operation Svalin remain officially unsolved, their consequences quietly integrated into classified research around the world. Yet the evidence, decaying film, resonance data, and the echoes beneath the lake tells a coherent story. Humanity attempted to command the weather and failed to control the consequences. The resonance array that hums beneath Lake Vättern stands as the last vestige of that ambition, buried by design but still alive, pulsing faintly beneath the cold water. It is both a monument and a warning, proof that once the air itself has been turned into an instrument of war, it never fully returns to silence. Chapter 4. The Redacted Collaboration. By early 2025, the question had shifted from what Operation Svalin was to how it had been allowed to exist across borders that were never meant to intersect. The dual insignia on the bunker, Luftwaffe Eagle and US Air Force Serial, were not a mystery of origin but a symptom of collaboration, redacted and rewritten by successive governments. Official records long held that Sweden remained neutral during both the Second World War and the Cold War. But the paper trail unearthed by independent investigators tells a different story. A neutral country turned quiet broker between opposing powers, its neutrality leveraged as camouflage for covert technology exchange. In January 2025, historian and archivist Anders Rydholm obtained temporary access to the Defense Ministry's restricted holdings vault under the pretense of cataloguing Cold War meteorological research. Among the stacks of decommissioned files, he located a misfiled folder labeled Project Glasvingen. 1952. The folder contained correspondence between the Swedish Air Force Research Bureau and an American counterpart known only as Office 47, Air Technical Section. One letter, dated May 11, 1952, bore the signature of Colonel Raymond Wilson, the same officer later referenced in the Red 113 files. Shipment of modified dispersal units complete, it read. Awaiting installation approval from Nordic Liaison. The accompanying Swedish reply confirmed receipt and included a handwritten note. Directive received via Svalin channel. Ensure all test data transmitted under civilian designation. Beneath the signature line, a rubber stamp in faded blue ink read, "For review by US Embassy, Stockholm." The revelation was explosive. It implied the American embassy itself had served as a cover for technology transfer under the guise of meteorological research. Additional evidence soon surfaced in US archives. An internal memo marked State Dept. Confidential, Air Liaison, Stockholm, July 1952. The document described cooperative field trials utilizing previously restricted apparatus, legacy German manufacture, for atmospheric calibration purposes. While sanitized of specifics, its phrasing matched that of the Swedish correspondence almost word for word. Rydholm's discovery was immediately seized under the Swedish Espionage Prevention Act. He was interrogated by SAPO for 17 hours and released without charge, but his research clearance was revoked. Within weeks, the Glasvingen file vanished from the ministry's index entirely. Rydholm's findings prompted renewed scrutiny of Sweden's post-war neutrality, especially concerning scientific exchange with the West. Between 1946 and 1953, the country received a sharp increase in technical aid from both Britain and the United States. Declassified customs manifests reveal the import of specialized laboratory equipment under diplomatic exemption, items consistent with atmospheric research instrumentation. FOA memoranda from 1948 mention joint studies with visiting engineers without listing names. Cross-referencing travel records, researchers identified at least 3 American physicists who arrived in Stockholm during that time, all affiliated with Project RAND, the precursor to the RAND Corporation. 1. Dr. Milton Reeves was later listed as a defense consultant for the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology. Reeves's personal logbook, found in his estate after his death in 1981, contained a cryptic entry from April 1949. Met with Nordic partners Svalin adaptation, mutual silence agreed that collaboration deepened as Cold War tensions escalated. In a 1951 NATO Technical Subcommittee transcript, now declassified, a British delegate made an offhand reference to the Scandinavian pilot project as proof of successful aerosolized radar disruption. The phrase was redacted in subsequent copies, but the surviving carbon original preserved the name Svalin. Beneath it, a handwritten note in the margin reads, "Sweden denies. Americans confirm off record." The meeting minutes were signed by Sir John Jenkins, Chief Scientific Advisor to the UK Air Ministry. When interviewed decades later, Jenkins's assistant recalled being told never to mention the lake again. By 1954, the operational secrecy surrounding Svalin required deliberate falsification of national archives. FOA's meteorological branch underwent reorganization, and all research pertaining to hydrological atmospheric modulation was transferred to a newly formed department, labeled Civil Environmental Studies. Budget analysis shows the department received over 6 million kroner in undisclosed foreign contributions between 1954 and 1957, funds untraceable to any parliamentary approval. The same year, Sweden established a direct communications link with US Air Force Europe headquarters in Wiesbaden, under the code identifier SCANDLink. Internal, NATO files list this connection as part of the Northern Defence Weather Network, but Swedish internal memos refer to it by another name, Echo Liaison. The same term reappeared 70 years later in the Red 113, documents describing NATO's retrieval of the Fetton. Bunker.parallel archives in the United States corroborate the narrative. In 2024, researchers at Georgetown University unearthed fragments of Air Force correspondence from the Office of Special Projects, dated December 1953. One memo, marked Svalin Phase 4 Termination Logistics, explicitly discussed the controlled flooding of the Lake Fetton installation. Joint Swedish compliance secured. Recommends submersion complete within Q1 1954 to mitigate political exposure, it stated. A signature at the bottom, later authenticated, belonged to Brigadier General Wilson, the same officer whose name appeared in the Glasvingen letters. The file was sealed under the Atomic Energy Act, despite containing no nuclear material. The decision suggested Svalin's classification level paralleled that of early atomic weapons research, underscoring its perceived strategic importance. Further investigation into Wilson's background revealed a curious detail. His service record lists a reassignment in early 1955 to a project codenamed Deep Echo, stationed in Greenland. That operation, uncovered separately in NATO archives decades later, involved acoustic surveillance arrays designed to detect Soviet submarines beneath polar ice. Both Svalin and Deep Echo shared similar technological terminology, references to resonance harmonics, and acoustic climate modeling. It is now widely theorized that Deep Echo was a direct continuation of Svalin research repurposed for the Cold War's early intelligence race. The transition from atmospheric to subglacial resonance suggests a consistent lineage of scientific manipulation, using nature itself as an instrument of surveillance and control. Sweden's complicity in such cooperation remains politically radioactive. When confronted with these findings, modern officials dismiss them as misinterpretations of incomplete data, yet leaked cabinet minutes from 1956 reveal that Swedish Prime Minister Tage Erlander personally approved scientific information exchanges with Western partners contingent on non-disclosure to Soviet observers. A separate memorandum, handwritten by Erlander's secretary and preserved in the Royal Library, references a legacy arrangement involving the Fetton site and prior US commitments. The phrase legacy arrangement appears again in a 1973 classified audit reviewing Sweden's military archives, suggesting the obligation extended across decades of leadership. The collaboration also had human costs. Personnel who worked on Svalin were bound by secrecy clauses that extended beyond their lifetimes. A 1961 FOA personnel list shows 23 individuals reassigned to non-existent departments. Several died under ambiguous circumstances: automobile accidents, sudden illness, unexplained disappearances. Among them was Dr. Niels Bergström, the meteorologist who oversaw the final phase of the 1953 flood operation. His diary, recovered from a private estate sale in 1994, contained only one relevant entry. They promised it would sink forever, but water does not forget. In the international arena, whispers of the collaboration occasionally surfaced. In 1968, a Soviet defector identified only as Vladimir R. informed British intelligence of a Western weather weapon tested in Scandinavia after the war. MI6 dismissed his statement as Cold War exaggeration, though an internal analysis appended to his file admitted the technical plausibility of atmospheric interference systems. The report concluded with a single recommendation: do not pursue further. Risk of exposure outweighs strategic value. The same language would later be used in a 1987 CIA internal assessment reviewing residual classified programs predating NATO's formation. Among the redacted project names, Svalin. By the time the Fetton bunker resurfaced in 2023, nearly every original witness was dead. The documentation that survived was fragmentary, existing only because someone, decades earlier, had chosen to misfile or mislabel it. Through these accidents of bureaucracy, the threads of an impossible alliance emerged. Nazi engineers rebranded as American scientists, Swedish officers trading neutrality for relevance, and intelligence agencies erasing history to rewrite it in the language of secrecy. The redacted collaboration that birthed Operation Svalin was neither a single crime nor a single cover-up. It was a culture of silence, meticulously engineered to outlive its architects. And beneath the surface of Lake Fetton, sealed in darkness, the evidence of that silence endures, humming faintly through the cold Swedish water, a whisper that the sky itself was once divided not by nations, but by secrecy. Chapter 5: The Silent Legacy. In April 2025, the Swedish Meteorological Institute registered a chain of unexplained atmospheric anomalies over Lake Fetton. For 3 consecutive nights, thermal imaging satellites recorded an expanding zone of elevated air temperature over the southern basin, roughly following the outline of the submerged structure discovered 2 years earlier. Civilian scientists proposed geothermal activity, but internal defense briefings marked the incident under anomalous signal recurrence. The file number assigned, 23DF Vetten, was identical to a 1953 classification code found in the original Svalin archives. It was not coincidence. Something beneath the lake had reawakened. By then, Operation Svalin had become an international controversy. Independent journalists across Europe, led by Lena Eklöf, had connected the dots between the Swedish bunker, declassified NATO files, and the long-suppressed meteorological experiments of the late 1940s. Their joint investigation, released under the title The Sky That Wasn't Ours, drew global attention before abruptly vanishing from digital platforms. 2 hosting servers in Belgium and Canada were taken offline by unknown actors. The journalists involved reported being followed, their communications intercepted. Eklöf herself disappeared while en route to an interview with former NATO archivist Claude Morel, who had promised to disclose final documentation from the Red 113 collection. Her vehicle was found abandoned near Jönköping, its navigation system frozen on a single waypoint, 58°8, 43N, 14 to 38, 12E, the exact coordinates of the Fetton bunker. What remained of the investigation was later reconstructed from encrypted backups leaked by an anonymous source using the codename Archivist9. The recovered files included several extraordinary items: fragments of a declassified NATO memorandum dated April 12, 1964, titled Svalin Continuity Directive, acoustic recordings from a 1953 submersion operation, and an internal FOA engineering diagram labeled Array Containment Sequence. The memorandum revealed that despite official claims of termination, Svalin's hardware had been modified to serve a long-term monitoring function, effectively transforming the lake itself into a passive atmospheric sensor The 1964 directive ordered Sweden and NATO to maintain reactive containment of the array and ensure that structural reactivation triggers were prevented. What those triggers were remained unclear until the modern thermal readings began to repeat. Analysis of the leaked acoustic recordings uncovered another revelation. The 1953 divers who flooded the bunker had recorded faint oscillations from within the sealed chamber moments before detonation. Initially dismissed as equipment interference, the signals were re-examined by contemporary analysts in 2025 using modern digital filters. The result was unmistakable: a rhythmic low-frequency pulse at exactly 16.2 Hz, the same resonance later detected by sonar teams in 2023. The sequence matched a calibration tone referenced in the 1949 atmospheric trial data. In effect, the system buried beneath Lake Fetton had never been shut down. It had entered a dormant state, awaiting specific environmental conditions to reactivate. Those conditions, geomagnetic fluctuation, ion density, and seasonal inversion, aligned perfectly during the spring of 2025. The Swedish government responded by sealing the area once again. On April 29, 2025, military vessels were deployed under the codename Operation Silver Curtain, establishing a no-fly zone over the southern basin. Officially, it was for environmental hazard containment. Privately, defense sources confirmed the presence of foreign advisors at the command center, among them American and British intelligence liaisons. The involvement of these nations, despite their decades of denial, suggested that Svalen's reactivation represented not merely a scientific curiosity, but a potential strategic risk. According to internal communications leaked from NATO's Northern Command, there was concern that the array's resonance frequencies could interfere with modern satellite and radar systems. One document, classified under the tag Echo Lake, stated bluntly, "If synchronization recurs, full-spectrum interference across Northern Europe is probable. Decommissioning may not be feasible without catastrophic destabilization." At 02:17 on May 2, 2025, Swedish naval hydrophones detected a surge in subaquatic pressure near the original entry site. Divers reported a faint blue luminescence emanating through the silt. A remote drone was deployed. Its feed lasted only 90 seconds before transmission ceased. The last visible frame captured the outline of a corroded metallic structure, partially exposed, vibrating imperceptibly. An accompanying data burst transmitted by the drone contained a single alphanumeric string. Svalen phased the reboot. Though some experts believe the string was a software error, others interpret it as an automated signal generated by the dormant control systems. Within hours, defense officials announced technical anomalies resolved and all external monitoring ceased. Civilian access to the lake remains prohibited to this day. Historians attempting to contextualize these events trace the silence back to a single doctrine: deniability through time. As long as enough decades separated the secret from the present, accountability would dissipate. Every government involved, Swedish, American, British, had inherited the same logic. In confidential interviews conducted after the 2025 incident, retired defense analysts admitted that fragments of Svalen's technology had been incorporated into modern atmospheric research programs, including satellite calibration and radar stealth development. "It's not gone," said one anonymous official. "It just changed its name." Svalen was the beginning of a vocabulary we still use: control, concealment, reflection. Meanwhile, local residents around Fetton began to notice new disturbances. Radios emitted static during calm weather. GPS devices malfunctioned within a 10-kilometer radius of the restricted zone. On particularly cold mornings, a faint hum could be heard echoing across the water, rhythmic and deep, like a machine breathing beneath the ice. Environmental authorities offered simple explanations: temperature inversions, pressure shifts, magnetic interference, but off-record technicians confirmed that none of these accounted for the regularity of the sound. One military sonar operator, speaking anonymously, claimed that the signal exhibited intentional patterning, like an active system running diagnostics. In the months that followed, fragments of new documentation leaked from NATO's Red 113 archive, now partially declassified under European transparency pressure. Among them was an undated field report titled Post-Containment Viability Assessment. Its final paragraph contained the only official acknowledgement of Svalen's existence in modern times. Residual function persists beneath hydrological layer. recommend indefinite containment, public disclosure inadvisable. The report's last line was stamped with a code familiar from earlier discoveries, Echo Svalan 47, and a single handwritten phrase, "The swallow still flies." Today, the official position of the Swedish government remains unchanged. No experimental military facility exists beneath Lake Vättern. The Swedish Meteorological Institute attributes all anomalies to natural factors. NATO, when pressed for comment, states only that historical research programs of non-nuclear nature were concluded decades ago. Yet researchers monitoring the region continue to record faint electromagnetic disturbances synchronized, precisely with global geomagnetic peaks. The data pattern matches the 1949 atmospheric trials down to the second decimal. The same rhythm, the same pulse, the same artificial signature. The legacy of Operation Svalan endures not through the physical remnants buried in silt, but through the quiet persistence of its principle, the belief that control of nature equals control of truth. The collaboration that built it is gone, the scientists and officers who orchestrated it long dead, their testimonies buried beneath layers of classification and national pride. But the technology they unleashed, an invisible architecture woven into the atmosphere, remains an open wound. Beneath the still surface of Lake Vättern, the air itself remembers. The hum continues, steady and deliberate, echoing through decades of silence, as if reminding those who listen that some secrets, once awakened, never go back to sleep.